Today, we're going to talk about driving innovation. And the word driving is really important. And the language we use around innovation is really important. And you'll see how we use the language of driving innovation in the context of the middle management layer inside your organization later on when I get to one of the frameworks that we use. But today is really focused on helping you as managers, as middle managers, as team leaders, as department heads, guide your leadership team around what it really takes to drive innovation, to build innovation capability, and specifically to build that culture of innovation. And the challenge is something that I see on a day-to-day basis with the work we do with teams around the world, where leaders want innovation and organizations need to drive growth through innovation and have a desire to build that culture of innovation, and push that responsibility and push that requirement down into the middle of the organization, putting pressure and reliance on you as middle managers and the middle of organizations to really drive that innovation-led growth, but without really putting the things in place that we know innovation requires. So that's what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about me. I'm just one tiny part of the amazing, super talented team we have at Culture Consultancy. But some of you may know me as the co-author of Building a Culture of Innovation. I wrote that with Derek and Joe, who are the founders of Culture Consultancy. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about today feature quite heavily in that book. I'm also an expert in what's called innovation maturity, so how we measure innovation maturity in organizations, and innovation maturity being the combination of innovation capability across an organization and how embedded that capability is as part of organizational culture. And we wrap that up into what we call innovation maturity. And again, that's one of the many tools that we've built at Culture Consultancy. So some of the other things that I do, I'm an adjunct faculty member and have been for many years at several different business schools, and I sit on a couple of different innovation or boards as an advisor and a board member, the Innovators CoLab and the Global Innovation Institute. So, and the last thing, I've just been made a senior fellow at the Conference Board. So if any of you've seen the Conference Board, or if you haven't, check that out. It's a really great resource for everything to do with building businesses, leadership, culture, strategy, absolutely everything. Great resource. So on to what we're going to talk about today. Why are we here? Well, we're here slightly tongue-in-cheek because of this or illustrations like this. What if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? We all know in business that isn't a strategy that we can really rely on and drive our organizations forward on. And innovation has become one of the antidotes to comedy sketches like this and to situations like this. Innovation as a capability, not a thing in itself. And I want to explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But innovation and how we innovate as organizations is consistently high in the ranks of what senior executives and organizations collectively say is important. And this is some data which year on year doesn't really fluctuate. These are from BCG and McKinsey, who run these surveys every year. 79% of organizations rank innovation in their top 3 priorities. I actually think this year the stats have come out and that's now 83%. And 84% of executives say innovation will be at least somewhat important for their company's growth strategies over the next 5 years. So we, you, I, everyone we work with, we recognize the importance of innovation. And yet we see this tiny little circle on the right-hand side. Despite all that focus and all of us knowing that innovation is super important, only 6% of executives rate the performance around innovation in their organization as excellent. So we've got this real gap between aspiration and ambition and acknowledgement that innovation is super important, and then what's actually happening on the ground. What I want to share with you today is how we can start to address some of those things by making innovation a core capability and a repeatable capability that you can build into your organization. This is a little graphic, and you can find this online. It's not playing for some reason, but you can find this graphic online, and it's a really great example of if it was going to play. Obviously, this is our first technical Gremlin. If it was going to play, you'll see the discipline runner, just a nice steady pace, continuously running along the line, and the motivation runner runs really, really fast and then overtakes, and then gradually drops back, and then runs really, really fast and overtakes, and then gradually runs back. And I use this because it's a really great analogy for what we see in organizations when it comes to innovation. Something happens, or innovation gets added into your annual strategy or your next strategy for the next few years as being something of significance and something important strategically that you need to push on in your organization. And there tends to be, in my experience, when that happens, a real sense of urgency and a push behind innovation. And there's this motivation that kicks off lots and lots of stuff. But because the right things aren't put in place, that motivation wanes, and 6 months, 12 months later on, everyone around the organization says, what happened to all the innovation stuff? It seems to have fizzled out. What we want to build today, and what I'm going to show you how to start to look at building, is the discipline runner. How do we build innovation, not as a reaction periodically when a senior exec decides it's important enough to add on to the strategic agenda, but how do we build it as a discipline, as a continuous capability that the organization has? In the same way that we have marketing and logistics and finance and sales and all of the other functions in an organization, they all have discipline, they all have consistency. And what we need to do is build innovation through the same lens and build that as a core capability with discipline, so that we continue to drive growth and solve challenges and build that innovation muscle. So I'm going to share 4 things with you today. The first will be what a high-performing innovation system looks like. And this is from 20 years of building the kind of culture and the kind of capability in organizations. And what I've codified in that system are the core things that every organization I've worked with has had to put in place to build innovation as a core capability. So I'm going to share with you what that system looks like, and we'll delve into each little part of it as we go along. The reason for doing that is it's going to make it really easy for you to understand the areas that you might need to do some more of and do some work on, but also some of the areas which aren't as well developed and therefore might be acting as a barrier to innovation. You'll be able to map that out and then share that with your leadership team, so you can share the things that are going to help enable innovation, but also the things that might currently be holding innovation back. The second thing is that's going to help you then translate what innovation as a core capability actually needs into language that your leadership teams can understand. And it's also going to help them understand what their role needs to be in the whole innovation agenda across your organization. The third thing we're going to go through is what type of innovation shapes culture or requires you to shape culture in a different way, but also in tandem drives the growth that your organizations are really looking for, versus vanity activity or innovation theatre, as it's now more commonly become known. And then finally, one of the most important things is I'm going to show you how to present the right framework. I'm going to share some examples of what the right framework looks like for the most important things that you need to put in place for your people to drive innovation, i.e., the time, the resources, and the frameworks and the decision-making frameworks that you'll need to put in place so that innovation becomes really pragmatic and practical and is able to come alive on a day-to-day basis. So, principle number one, innovation is an outcome. What I mean by that is we talk about innovation and we use the language of innovation commonly now across organizations. The word itself is peppered on websites. It's used multiple times in corporate strategy documents. The language itself is thrown around on a day-to-day basis in a really common, low-value way. What we have to do with innovation and the whole subject is revalue the word itself. And how I revalue it is to position innovation not as a thing that we do or that we have or that we build, but to position innovation as an outcome of lots and lots and lots of different things that come together. Different ingredients, and those ingredients make up the system that I mentioned a minute ago. And when all those ingredients are right, and when they all come together, sometimes innovation becomes an outcome. And what I mean by that is we solve problems, we develop solutions, we capitalize on opportunities, and we build and do and provide things as an organization which our customers absolutely love, which our customers say that thing that they did, that product that they've provided, the service that they provide, the experience that they've just given me, that was so much better than anything else that they've done before. It was way better than their next nearest competitor. That's the outcome that we're looking for when we talk about innovation. Because that outcome and that reaction is what drives results, and that drives increased spend or increased loyalty, it drives growth, it increases turnover, etc., etc. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do when we pursue innovation. To build that kind of outcome and build that kind of capability, my experience over the last 20 years has shown me that these are fundamentally the 5 core components that we've got to have in place in our organizations. So this is what I call the innovation system. The first thing is absolute clarity around strategy. Where do we want to go with innovation? What do we want innovation to do for our organization, and where do we want it to take us? There's something I call the innovation growth gap, which is if we continue to drive forward our organization and we don't do anything different, where will we be over the next 3, 4, 5 years? Will we continue to drive 2%, 5%, 10% growth, whatever those targets are? If we don't do anything, will we meet that target? Versus what's our aspiration? Where do we really want our organization to go? What do we really want to achieve? And what are the big problems we really want to solve? And what does that gap look like? So where does that curve go on the graph compared to the previous curve? And the difference is what I call the innovation growth gap. What do we need to do? How do we fill that gap? And what new ideas, what new strategies, what innovation do we actually need to fill that growth gap? And we have to make that really, really clear from a strategy point of view for all of our people so that everyone knows how to contribute and why innovation is important. We've also got to be really clear on the type of innovation that we want and where we want those ideas. And there's another framework that I'm going to share with you in a minute that will help you map that out. The second building block to the system is processes. So we want people to innovate. We want them to solve problems. We want them to come up with ideas. We want them to develop things. We want them to test and experiment. We have to give people processes, tools, and frameworks to be able to do that. Most of the people that we manage, that we lead, that we work with have never been taught how to run an experiment. They've never been taught how to validate assumptions. They've never been taught how to build a prototype. we have to teach them how to do those things, and we have to give them those tools. The third part of the system is then culture. And culture follows process. So if we want a certain behavior, if we want people to use a certain framework, if we want them to use a certain approach, if we want them to do things in a certain way and follow a certain process, we need to build a culture across our organization that promotes that kind of behavior and using the different tools and frameworks and systems that we've said are crucial to innovation. And obviously, we've got to build a culture that really promotes people to want to do that. So things like empathy and psychological safety and building an environment where it's okay to take some risk. And again, we'll cover some of those things in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then the two main things which are really relevant to everyone listening in today are what kind of leadership and how do we need to lead in order that this system becomes a part of how our organization works on a day-to-day basis. And then more importantly for you guys on the call is what then does management of that look like on a day-to-day basis? How do we as managers bring innovation alive on a day-to-day basis? How do we help translate that strategy pragmatically into behavior on a day-to-day basis? How do we promote and enable and enhance the use of the tools and processes, etc.? And how do we, on a day-to-day basis, take responsibility for building that culture that we've said is really important and maintaining it, bringing it alive on a day-to-day basis? So have a think about where your organization sits in respect to these 5 things, because they all have to work in tandem. You know, the diagram that you see on screen is very much drawn in the style of a jigsaw. So it's not a case of saying, well, we're really, really good at one component, that will be okay. We have to build each of these components at equal levels of maturity. The second principle that I want to share is middle out is the right narrative. What I mean by that is for many, many years, we've heard lots of language around is innovation and is a culture of innovation, is it top down or is it bottom up? Is it driven by leaders and do they build and drive that culture from the top? Or is it real grassroots from the bottom of the organization and it just bubbles up through the organization? My experience, without question, from every organization that I've worked with and helped on this, and all of the experience that the rest of the cultural change experts at Culture Consultancy have seen, is we build a culture of innovation from the middle out. You as middle managers are so important, so important in the whole journey that organizations take when they want to build a culture, the right culture for innovation. A middle out for me means it's the right narrative versus top down or bottom up being false narratives. Now, slightly complex diagram on screen, but I'm going to simplify it for you in a minute. We use this to map out with organizations what the different roles are that different layers across an organization need to be responsible for and need to bring alive on a day-to-day basis. And we call it ODC, Own, Drive, Contribute. The role of executives and senior leaders in an organization primarily should be to take complete ownership of the innovation agenda. And you'll see at the top, that means what needs to be in place from a physical assets point of view, strategy, funding, governance, complete ownership of those things. What then needs to be in place in terms of the mental components, so the skills, behavior, intellectual processes, actions, mindset. And then thirdly, what does psychological safety when it comes to innovation look like at executive level? And then the same for those other layers, right? So for you guys, What does that then look like at a managerial level? In the middle of an organization, what do those three things look like in the context of you as managers being asked to drive innovation and bring innovation alive on a day-to-day basis? What does that look like? And the same for non-managerial employees. The challenge with this is many times in my experience going into an organization, I've seen the middle part of this diagram come alive. What I mean by that is the same approach to the things that need to be in place, the strategy, pushed down through executives, managers, and non-managerial. The same approach to mindset, skills, and behaviors pushed down through executive, managers, and non-managerial. And more importantly, and more damagingly, the same approach to psychological safety in the workplace being pushed down through executive, managers, and non-managerial. The reality is what we've got to do is shift to what's on the right. So scrap the top-down approach and figure out what the diagram looks like on the right-hand side. When it comes to innovation, what do executives need to own in terms of the physical things they need to be responsible for, their mindset, behavior, actions, capabilities, and then what psychological safety looks like at their level? That's less important. In the middle of the organization, what do you need physically to be in place when the top of the organization says, we need you guys to drive innovation in the middle of the organization, bring it alive? Figure out what you physically need to have in place for that to be possible. And you have to communicate that to your executive team. Figure out what skills, capabilities, behavior, mindset you need and your colleagues need in the middle of the organization in order to be able to drive innovation and bring it alive on a day-to-day basis. Figure that out and map it out and present that to your senior team, your executive team. And then thirdly, what does psychological safety look and feel like to you in the middle of the organization when you're pressured from the top to drive innovation and bring it alive on a day-to-day basis? But also, you have to instill a psychologically safe environment for all of those non-managerial people below you. What does that look like? What does it feel like? And how do you communicate what you need to build and what that environment looks like to your executive team? If you can map that out, and we map these things out for clients all over the world, and we help middle managers then present back to executive teams just what needs to be in place for managers in the middle of an organization to bring innovation alive. So have a think about what these things look like in your organization, what's already in place, what might not be in place, and then how you would present that to your senior team to say, if you want us to drive innovation and bring it alive on a day-to-day basis, these are the things that we need either autonomy to build and put in place, or we need you to take ownership of making sure that they're in place. The third principle is a little bit similar to the last one, which is the middle out narrative is the one that really works. The third principle is built around that middle ground as well, but it's a different middle ground. Principle number 3 is the middle ground is the most fruitful. When we look at the middle ground, when it comes to innovation, the core thing, and this really links to what I shared with you a minute ago, the core thing is building an environment, and you guys in the middle of an organization building an environment and the kind of culture where risk-taking, creativity, experimentation, and learning become core parts of how you operate on a day-to-day basis. We know, and it's, unequivocally, we know taking risk and trying things out and understanding that a high proportion of the things that we try in organizations will fail. It's a core part of driving innovation. It's a core part of a culture of innovation. So we have to take responsibility as managers and leaders and department heads and executives for building a culture where that kind of environment embraces risk, embraces failure, because it sees it as opportunities to learn about what is working, what has worked, what will work, but more importantly, what won't work. And you can see on the right-hand side there, some of the most innovation-led organizations and the leaders of their organizations really understanding that, risk and trying things and experimentation are core components of what really pushes organizations forward. But building that kind of culture that really embraces that is the responsibility of you and your executive team. And the reason why that's important is what we need to build is activity in the middle ground in terms of these three components that I've showed with you on screen. If we look at this as what I call the innovation scale, on the left-hand side, you'll see the teal box, the green box, the comfort zone, or the price of entry, as I sometimes call it. That's incremental innovation or continuous improvement, as some of you might refer to it. Now, that's happening all over your organization every day, whether you see it, whether you know about it. It's happening every day across the organization. Every organization is constantly tweaking things, changing things, improving things on very, very small levels, but hundreds and hundreds of times a month, a year across the organization. But those things, as we all know, don't shift the needle. They don't drive real competitive advantage. They don't drive real growth. What the innovation consultancy world has tried to convince organizations over the last 10 years then is, well, if you're doing that, and if continuous improvement or incremental innovation isn't really shifting the needle, you need to be disruptive. You need to be radical. You need to go right to the other end of the innovation scale and start trying to become game-changing and radical and transformative and disruptive. And there's a place for that. But for most organizations, coming up with really, truly radical, disruptive ideas is end of the rainbow kind of stuff. It's so infrequent that it almost never happens for the majority of organizations. But what we do is we see organizations that do disrupt and do, radically change sectors. And as corporates and big organizations, we see the success that those organizations have had. And we see how disruptive they've been, and we see how valuable their organizations have become. So it's very, it's very alluring, and it's very tempting and seductive to think, well, we need to be more radical and disruptive. The reality is, something that's radical or disruptive is an effect. It's an effect that your idea, your proposition, your product, your service, your business model has on the sector or on the market. And that effect means that whatever you do becomes disruptive, and it disrupts the market, or it's perceived as a radical change of direction for a sector. But they're so infrequent. And the challenge with trying to be really radical or disruptive as well is that those ideas and those solutions or whatever it is that you're labeling disruptive or radical tends to be very expensive, high risk, very, very infrequent, and therefore highly strategic, which means it's probably something that only half a dozen or 10 or 12 people at the top of the organization are going to be involved in. So there's no emphasis on culture. There's no emphasis on how do we repeat that capability to disrupt. So you don't build a capability by pursuing radical or disruptive innovation. In the same way that right at the left-hand side, small scale, small risk, highly repeatable, continuous activity, so very, very frequent, but very, very low impact. What I'd like to encourage you to look at and to think about in your organizations is what I call the fruitful middle ground. The blue box in the middle is something we call differentiated innovation. We call it the cultural catalyst because differentiated innovation is based on the premise that it's more than incremental, but it's not as bold and as risky as trying to be radical or disruptive. But what differentiated innovation is about is a pure focus on the customer, a pure focus on the market, our customers, the people that we serve, a pure focus on being really, really human-centered and seeking out opportunities to do things different. So to build different products or to differentiate our brand or to build different propositions. They don't necessarily have to be brand new. This isn't about creating something that never ever existed before, but it's about a focus on how do we do things differently as an organization. And by default, that means these things are medium in scale. So they're medium in terms of their risk profile. What you want to build is the capability to repeatedly look at problems, ideas, and opportunities in this middle ground. And you want to build the capability to repeatedly do that. So to do it frequently, not as frequently as incremental innovation, because that's hundreds and hundreds every year, and not as infrequently as being radical or disruptive, because that might be one game-changing idea every decade. But how do you build the capability to repeatedly spin teams up and look at problems and opportunities a dozen times a year or 20 or 30 times a year? And your challenge is how you build a balanced portfolio of that activity. But the middle ground is the fruitful space where we drive growth as organizations, because we're now building 2, 3, 4x solutions. And in that middle ground is where it requires a different type of leadership, a different approach to managing innovation on a day-to-day basis, and a different approach to what kind of culture do we need to build that repeated capability to innovate in this space on a day-to-day basis. And the final principle, number 4, is culture follows process. And I mentioned this at the start when I shared the overview of the system with you. Now think about that middle ground that I've just outlined. If culture follows process, what are the processes, like I shared in that box in the system diagram, that box around processes? If we want to pursue that middle ground of growth, driving differentiated ideas, solutions, and problems, what processes and tools and frameworks will we have to have in place in order that we can develop ideas and build a repeatable capability to develop ideas in that middle ground? And this is something that, this is an example from a client of what we call an idea life cycle. Now, if you've seen these things before, great. If you haven't, an idea life cycle is very, very simply a framework for teams to develop ideas. And as the name suggests, it's a framework for what's the life cycle, or what's the cycle that an idea goes through throughout its life, from identification of a problem right up to implementation of the solution into the market or production or rollout or sales to customers. What are those stages that idea has to go through? And what you have to build in your organization is your idea life cycle. It's not as easy or as simple as taking a standard approach to this off the shelf. This is exclusive to your organization, to the market you're in, the way that you see the world, what your strategy says is important for you to focus on over the next few years, and also how you want to make decisions on how you invest in ideas and teams as they develop their ideas. So an idea lifecycle will typically have several stages. This example has 5, starting right from the start of, let's forget about the idea for a moment. Let's go back, and in stage 1, let's really figure out whether we understand the problem deeply enough to warrant starting to build a solution for it. What's the evidence the problem exists? What's the scale? Who does it affect? Really mapping out everything we know about the problem. And typically, organizations don't do this enough. They jump too quickly into solution building and don't spend enough time on really understanding systemic problems deep enough. So you need to build your version of an idea lifecycle. And when you spin a team up to solve a problem or to work on an idea, that team religiously should follow the idea lifecycle. What that allows you to do is make decisions based on evidence and not assumption and not bias. And your framework, your idea lifecycle should set out, as it does here, the bottom pink section is all of the questions in each stage that a team needs to answer in order to present the progress of their idea back to a decision-making team or a venture board. And the green section at the top is the evidence that that venture board is looking for in order that they can make a decision on a team in each stage. Making those decisions really process-driven, no subjectivity, no bias, everything being evidence-based. This is how you, if you've heard the phrase fail fast, fail cheap, this is exactly how you fail fast, fail cheap. This allows you to assess the progress of ideas and teams in a really methodical, systemized way, so that you can continue to fund them and invest in them, or you can cut the team and fail fast, fail cheap. The second part to that process is mapping out who's going to make those decisions, when those decisions will be made. So how often does a team working on an idea, how often do they meet, or how often do they have to present to a venture board? How much time do those teams get to work on their idea every week? That's really, really critical, because the one thing we know in every organization I've ever been into, time is the biggest killer to innovation. People being expected to be creative and come up with ideas and solve really systemic, high-value problems, but without being given the time away from their day job specifically to devote to solving problems. So you'll have to make decisions on how much time you give a team who's working on an idea to work on that idea every week. And then the final section is, are you going to give them any budget? If they're in stage 1, do they get any kind of funds or access to budget in order to help develop that idea? Do they get any in stage 2, stage 3? Does it increase as their idea matures? And does their availability to access funds for developing their idea increase? You have to build this for your organization. This is the critical link to leadership and executives, because this has to be built with them and signed off by them and owned. Remember the diagram I showed earlier. How do executives own the innovation agenda? There has to be ownership of this framework at the top of the organization, because it's so easy to build this and then not follow it, or for something to happen where meetings get cancelled, or for some reason, oh, well, I haven't been able to access that $500 that is promised in stage 3. You need ownership, and that this process needs policing by someone senior enough to say, no, stick to it. We've agreed to it. This is the process we follow. We must stick to it religiously. And if you do that, you will have now created a framework, a process, and a system for repeatedly driving innovation in your organizations. Here's what it actually looks like. So teams in stage 1, you'll see the diagram here. In stage 1, they present to a venture board. The venture board then makes a decision. Do they progress the team to the next stage? Do they keep them in this stage to do a little bit more work because the evidence isn't quite compelling enough? or as the red diagram icon there suggests, do we kill the idea? Do we fail fast, fail cheap? Have the teams not been able to validate any assumptions? Do we kill the idea and divert funds and budget and resources to another idea, i.e. fail fast, fail cheap? So in summary, 4 core things. Look in your organizations about whether or not you have the right system in place for innovation: strategy, processes, culture, leadership, and management. Have you got all of the components that each one of those different parts of the system requires? And are they all mature enough and mature at the right level? Does that system work really efficiently? Help your leaders understand what their role is and what they need to own in order to bring innovation alive on a day-to-day basis. Do they need to own that part of the innovation process I've just shared with you? Do they need to own the fact that they overrule decisions that stop people being able to utilize that process in that system? Do they need to own the core innovation strategy? The third thing is, look at whether you're building the right balance across your innovation portfolio. Have you got incremental innovation going on a day-to-day basis? Are you looking at the future and 10, 20 years ahead and something radical, disruptive and future focused? But are you missing that really fruitful middle ground in terms of 2, 3, 4x kind of ideas? And if you are, start to figure out how you can do work in that middle ground. And then the final thing is, like the running video that wouldn't play earlier, build the discipline by following the process. Create the process, create the framework. Whenever you spin a team up to solve an idea, get them to follow the process religiously. Stick to the process, stick to the cadence of meeting, stick to the framework. Don't go off piste. And if you do that, you systemize innovation and you make it a really repeatable part of your whole organizational culture. Now, if anyone has any questions, you are free to put them into the chat or the questions section, and I will do my best. We've got about 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. I will do my best to answer them. On a technical note, do not ask me why I moved my hands in front of my camera earlier and it seems to have zoomed in on me. It's a brand new camera and I haven't figured it out yet. So if I'm overly large on your screen, I apologize. I'll step back. Chris Green, love the innovation process. It's just about having, let me see if I can click that. Is it just about having a standalone innovation process, or is there a piece of work to see how innovation needs to be embedded in the BAU processes? My answer to that is it all depends on what your processes are, Chris, and whether or not the processes that you have in the organization are aligned as close enough to what I've shared with you, or whether they will actually force teams to work in a way that's slightly too different. I'm always nervous when organizations say, well, can't we just use our standard product development roadmap or our standard project management process? So I think it's about you looking at that process and being really, really objective about would it inhibit teams developing ideas, or is there a hybrid? And it might be that you build a process like the life cycle, for example, but certain parts of it dip in and out of your current processes, like how does a team access funding, for example. If you can make that really sort of flexible and really easy and remove as many barriers as you can, then yeah, I don't see why you can't sort of align it and embed it and tag it into existing processes, but without without seeing them, I can't give you a binary answer. It's not a case of saying, yeah, just fit them into standard processes. It's really case dependent. The core thing is, be really honest when you look at those processes and just say, do you know what? If a team came up against that, that would really inhibit their process, i.e. their progress, sorry. It would really inhibit them because our current process now requires them to do this and this and this. An absolute classic one, Chris, is asking for things like a business case way too early in the process. So imagine, you've got a really early stage idea. And what I've seen in many organizations is, in order for that team to progress any further, they've got to start presenting the business with some kind of financial metrics and projections on impact. And, they've got to build a whole business case. And for really early stage ideas, that's just impossible to do. And what you end up doing is the process then kills the progress of that idea, which actually might have ended up turning into a brilliant idea. But because you're asking for financial projections and a business case right at the early stage, you kill the idea too early. So the idea life cycle has to be designed to kill ideas at the right time, not leave a team developing them too long so that you burn cash, but not killing them too early that you actually kill an idea that actually would have been quite interesting. So just figure out whether your processes do that. If anyone else has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. If you do have them, put them in the questions section, which I believe is on your screen somewhere. If there aren't any, unless Chris has another one. Chris, did we answer your question? If we did, that's great. Oh, right, let me have a look. I've not used this system before, so bear with me, I'm still. So who's this? Is it Filippo? A key input is time allocation of middle managers to share their agenda is focusing. What practical advice could you give to encourage that? So, yes, this is where your relationship with your senior executive becomes really, really crucial. In the same way as that framework I've just shared with you maps out how much time do we want to allocate to a team in order to drive innovation, you have to present the case back to your executive to say, well, as a middle manager, I need to support the ongoing drive for building that kind of culture and the ongoing drive and support for those teams. Therefore, there's an allocation that I need to make for each one of those teams that we have spun up looking at an idea. There's an allocation that I need to associate with that team in order to support them. And that team might have 1 hour, 4 hours a week working on an idea. You might have to allocate 30 minutes or an hour to support that team. Those teams will need support. They'll need coaching. They'll need support from people like you as managers that can make things happen, that can connect them to other people in the organization, that can provide them with data or insight or market intelligence or just experience. So yes, Filippo, make a case for every one of the team, every team that you spin up that's working on an idea, make a case that you also need an allocation of time to support that team. So who's this? Peter Robinson. I thought that question would come from someone like you. Should Jaguar have used the idea life cycle before proceeding with their agency? That's a controversial one. It may very well have helped them, Peter. It may very well have helped them. Right, who else have we got? Oh, that's Tony's test. What else have we got? Chris, you're right. It's always a balance. Processes being too strict or over the top can stifle innovation, not nurture it. That's exactly right. You have to spend a lot of time designing your life cycle and the process that goes with it. What you'll probably find is, and then test it. So, Chris, I'm just coming back to your comment about finding the right balance between processes being too strict or over the top. The key thing is test and experiment with your idea life cycle and your process. So build an idea life cycle and a process, then deploy it with a few teams. So spin some teams up to work on ideas. And as you go along, tweak and manipulate that idea life cycle. You might find that you've got a question in stage one of that life cycle that teams are just really struggling to answer at that stage in their ideas development. So it might be that you've actually inadvertently put a question in stage one that might really need to go in stage two. So feel free to test that life cycle out on 3 or 4 teams and change things around. You might find that you allocate teams an amount of time, and those teams say, it's just not enough. We're really struggling to get through the questions in each stage of the life cycle in enough time before we have to present back to the venture board. So it might be that they need more time. You might find that teams in stage 1 or 2, you haven't allocated them any access to budget, and they're coming back saying, but we just need 200 quid to buy some data. We're getting to, because of the kind of business we're in, spinning a quick sort of landing page up to do some A/B testing is a really important part of how we validate ideas. And we've got no budget in stage 2, but most of your teams want to do something like that and they need budget. So again, you might have to just, as you go along, tweak what your process and what your idea life cycle include in each stage. It's a work in progress. Once you've put half a dozen teams through, or maybe a dozen teams through the process, and you've tweaked it a little bit, you'll get to the point where you go, we've hit the sweet spot. This now works. The process is right. It's not too constrained, but it's not completely loose. We're killing what we think is the right amount of ideas at the right part of our life cycle. And you'll know when it's right. Peter, I assume the key to adoption and success is not just top-level sponsorship, but also bottom-up collaboration, so that operational teams feel included. Yes, absolutely. So if you go back to, if we go back to here, look at non-managerial section. There's another false sort of phrase that really fills me with dread in the innovation world when we talk about culture. And that phrase is, innovation is everyone's job. Well, no, it's not. If we put that another way, if at the end of the year we sit every employee in every one of your organizations down and say, right, innovation is everyone's job, that's one of the mantras of our organization, so we're going to do your annual appraisal now, and we've gone through loads of things and we've come to the section on innovation. Can you share with me now, as part of your appraisal, how you've innovated this year? 99% of your employees will fail that question. The right language is what I show you on the screen here. How do I contribute to the innovation agenda? Now, contributing to the innovation agenda is wholly different than innovation is part of my job. Not everyone's creative, not everyone has ideas, not everyone can come up with solutions to problems. But what you can do with an employee culturally, and what HR can help you build into the fabric of your organization, is how everyone can contribute to the innovation agenda. A classic and a really easy example is, I'm on an innovation team with 2 of my colleagues. I've been given 3 to 4 hours per week to work on my idea. One of my colleagues who isn't on that team is going to backfill an hour a week of my time, or they're going to take one of the tasks next week that I need to have done but I haven't got time for. That can be codified, that can be logged, it can be documented, it can be evidenced. Now at the end of the year, when my HR director says, or my line manager says, and how have you contributed to innovation this year, Chris? I can say, well, here are the 7 times that I supported teams. Here is all the support that I gave to 2 of my colleagues while they were on teams. Contributing to innovation is how we position the new version of innovation is everyone's job. The key here is the culture that we create. To answer your main question, Peter, the culture that we create in an organization so that people want to contribute to the innovation agenda, not just that they feel they have to because it is part of their annual appraisal or it's made part of their role. We need people who want to willingly contribute their creativity, their thinking, their challenge to everything that we do as an organization. And that is the role of management, and that is the role of leadership. Have we got any more? Input time. Right, one final question, and I just want to go onto a few bits. When's the right time to include senior execs during innovation workshops to avoid their present stifling ideas? The key thing here, Peter, is you have to have multiple sponsors. So innovation should be on the strategic agenda, and you should have multiple sponsors. Whether it's right, it's not a blanket, we don't want execs in a room to stifle innovation, or it's more about the right exec in the room can enhance idea development. So it's about the right exec in the room, not necessarily whether exec should be in the room or not. The key thing is when you're building all of these things, when you're building the strategy, the process, the life cycle, the framework, you have to include exec, managers, non-managerial employees. We will never build a strategy or a cultural framework or anything for an organization when it comes to innovation if we don't go up and down the organization and involve multiple people. So having the right stakeholders in the meeting, Peter, is more important than just saying, do we want execs in or not? Okay, great questions. I appreciate some of you sharing your thoughts and asking those questions. If there are any questions, feel free to email me. I'll do my best. You know, I know some of you might be mulling over things and have questions at a later date. But a little bit more about culture consultancy. We obviously specialize in organizational culture, in leadership and behavior change. We specifically have a focus with my expertise as part of the team on how we build innovation capability and innovation culture. And we have a brilliant team of people across the whole of the culture consultancy team. And collectively, that means we've won several awards. So Consultancy of the Year 2022, Consultancy of the Year 2023. And it's just a testament to the work of the whole culture consultancy team. So if you do have any questions, if there's anything that hasn't been answered on today's session, or if something comes to mind where you think, actually, I just should have asked that question, I want to go a little bit deeper, feel free to give me a call. You can find me on LinkedIn or drop me an email. You'll notice there's no H in my name, so it's chris.beswick, so chris.beswick@cultureconsultancy.com. And I will do my best to answer any of your questions. That's it from me. I really appreciate all of your time. I know time is precious at the moment, especially with people getting ready to go on vacation. So if you are about to go on holiday, please have an amazing time. Feel free to email me. Feel free to share what I've shared with your colleagues. And hopefully we'll see some of you and we'll work with some of you soon. Have an amazing rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.